That's right, today we're talking about the continuation of the Holy Roman Empire. While Charlemagne is often considered to be the first true Holy Roman Emperor, because after his death everything disintegrated, there's a restart to this, and Otto I is truly considered to be the first. But in the meantime, we have to understand the fundamental relationship that the Church has with the Holy Roman Empire.
Charlemagne's coronation as Emperor of the Romans on Christmas Day of 800 set a new precedent with the Church above the state.
And it truly establishes the Pope as the supreme authority in all of Europe. Now, at the same time, Charlemagne is often glorified for his contributions to uniting Europe under Christianity. And at the same time, he was truly a moral authority as well. And he left a number of different quotes and teachings about how people should act, like this one.
Right action is better than knowledge, but in order to do what is right, we must know what is right. Charlemagne.
Charlemagne has stumbled upon a very clear truth. In order to do what is right, we have to know what is right. But how do we know what's right? Well, that's a question that people have been trying to answer for years. It all goes back to this conversation about worldview. What do you believe and why? And when it comes to truth and what is right, many people have different beliefs. But in the Christian church, in the Christian tradition, generally, the Bible is our source of morality. It's our source of right and wrong. And remember, in the Middle Ages, it is the church that interprets the Bible and then gives that information to the people. So because of that, the church should be a beacon for what is right and wrong. Except that's not really the case.
It was a time of anarchy, a time when the world seemed to fall apart. Even the church depended on the barbarian tribes who ruled the West. As the barbarians were Christianized, the church became more barbarous. This was the Dark Ages. Eugene Weber.
Thanks, Eugene. You see, Weber points out a distinct truth about the church. As the world changed around it, so did the church. And in an effort to seize power, the church became increasingly secular. It strayed further and further away from the teachings of the Bible itself. And if the church, that beacon of morality and right and wrong, drifts away, well, then the people are going to drift away too. Not to mention there was all the confusion about what the church actually believed and what was actually taught, as we talked about with the medieval church and the penitential cycle in general. It all comes together here. But in the Middle Ages, we also see that the church can't survive on its own. While it might have authority over everything, it can't necessarily protect itself. And just like in the events with Charlemagne, when Pope Leo called on Charlemagne to put down a rebellion, Pope John XII does the same thing with Otto. Otto was a descendant of the Carolingian line, and he was ruling in the middle portion of the land divided up in the Treaty of Verdun, which we would call Germany or Saxony. And as the king of Germany, he came into Italy and rescued Italy from the invading Magyars. He also married Adelaide, the princess of Italy, and therefore had control over much of Italian lands. And at the same time, he came in quickly and pushed down another rebellion in Rome and allowed Pope John XII and the church to remain independent and in control. It's for that reason that Otto would be crowned Holy Roman Emperor.
An extremely thankful Pope John XII coronated Otto I in 962 as Emperor of the Romans, the same title that Charlemagne had received in 800. As an effective ruler, Otto ruled in conjunction with the church, and in a way that echoed back to old Roman emperors. He was truly the first Holy Roman Emperor.
What's that? What's the Holy Roman Empire, you asked? I am so glad you asked. Well, let's start with this. It's not really holy, it's not Roman, and it's probably too small to actually be an empire. So what is it actually? Well, the holy indicates the connection with the Catholic Church and the Pope that we've already established, that the Pope crowns the emperor and therefore is above him. The Roman part goes back to this tradition that the church has, that it is a continuation of the Roman Empire. And that may or may not be true, but there are some Roman influences. And on top of that, the Holy Roman Empire often contains some of the territory that the Western Empire had at the twilight of the empire.
Throughout its history, the territory controlled by the Holy Roman Empire tends to shift, but generally it rules Germany, parts of France, and sometimes Italy.
Now, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but the Holy Roman Empire will give way and eventually become Germany, but that's not until the 17 and 1800s. In the meantime, much of the medieval history of the Holy Roman Empire involves this conflict and struggle between the Holy Roman emperors and the popes, both of which believe they should have power over the other. And maybe the most famous example of this is the squabble that happened between Emperor Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII, who both had different reasons for conflicting.
Pope Gregory VII intended to expand the papacy's power over the Holy Roman Empire. He wanted the church to be completely independent of secular rulers. As a result, he banned lay investiture, or the process of emperors naming bishops and clergy. He put this power back within the church.
And one can see where the Pope is coming from. A priest or a bishop should probably be elected by somebody in the church, somebody who has control over theological and biblical matters. But Henry argued that because bishops were technically landowners and needed to be taxed, that decision should be made by the emperor, who handled all land withholdings. Regardless, this became a pretty bitter conflict between the two. And Henry's stubbornness and belief that he should have this power really conflicted with Pope Gregory's views. And it's because of that that Pope Gregory will wield his one power that he truly has over secular authority. And that is excommunication. Now, we've discussed this before and how powerful of a tool this was believed to be during the time. If you're excommunicated, remember, you don't have access to the church, and therefore you don't have access to the sacraments or the ability to get penance, which means you're doomed. That's probably why Henry reacted the way that he did.
Fearful of what excommunication meant for him, Henry IV traveled by foot in a snowstorm to visit Pope Gregory and beg for his forgiveness. This display of both confession, recognition of wrong, as well as complete humiliation allowed Gregory to un-excommunicate Henry.
The result was the Concordat of Worms in 1122, which was an agreement that said that the popes are the ones who elect the bishops, but the emperor decides whether or not that bishop can have a fief or a piece of land, and also decides taxation. Oh, and you want the punchline of this story? Yeah, after the Concordat of Worms, Henry has Gregory exiled. Funny how that ends up working. Overall, this sets a precedent for the continued struggles for power between the Pope and we'll see another one with arguably the most powerful Holy Roman Emperor.
Arguably the most powerful and successful Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick I, or Frederick Barbarossa, Redbeard, tried to increase Holy Roman power and size by invading Italy and taking land from the Pope himself. Despite being defeated by the Pope and the Lombard League, Frederick quickly joined the ongoing Crusades and traveled to the Holy Land.
Frederick led the Holy Roman Empire in the Third Crusade, which is known as the Kings Crusade, and it featured both Frederick, Richard I, and Philip II of France. The Crusades themselves need a whole nother video to explain what's going on there, but know that during this, Frederick Barbarossa was trying to protect the church and fight on behalf of the church and what the Pope had commanded. Yet it's here that Frederick will die. And his death isn't exactly what you'd expect. It wasn't in battle. No, Frederick drowned. And there's actually a little bit of debate about how and why he drowned. Do you want to hear the story? All right, we'll do it here. There's a number of different accounts that feature different reasons as to why Frederick drowned.
A monk named Ansbert claimed that the emperor, against everyone's advice, chose to swim across the river and was swept away by the current. An anonymous account claims, after the many and terrible exertions that he, Frederick I, had undergone in the previous month and more, he decided to bathe in that same river, for he wanted to cool down with a swim. But by the secret judgment of God, there was an unexpected and lamentable death, and he drowned. And maybe more interesting is this Muslim account from the historian Ibn al-Athir. The king went down to the river to wash himself and was drowned at a place where the water was not even up to his waist. Thus God saved us from the evil of such a man.
Now, this is a great lesson once again on historical perspective. Each of the authors probably have a different level of credibility based on their background and probably a different opinion and portrayal of the event. So we know that Frederick Barbarossa drowned. We just don't exactly know how or why. Either way, I think it's safe to assume that he wasn't necessarily the brightest. You see, at best, he fell off his horse while trying to cross this river and drowned in his arm. That's the best scenario here. That's the only one that really saves his intelligence. Because the second account said that he drowned because he was so tired from everything going on in the Crusades and he went into water that was probably too deep and he just wasn't strong enough to swim. Or maybe he couldn't swim in the first place. Which that's what the Muslims said. They claimed that he drowned in the water that wasn't even up to his waist. Kind of makes Frederick look like a moron. Regardless, Frederick was dead, and because of that, the Holy Roman Empire's army tried to take him back to Europe. They actually pickled his body. Yeah, just like you would do with pickles. Now, unfortunately, his remains didn't actually make it back to Europe, and the Holy Roman Empire has to pull out of the Crusade because of that, but that's a whole other thing for another day. In the meantime, just like Frederick, just like Henry, there will be another debate between the emperor and the pope, although this time it gets a little crazy.
The grandson of Frederick Barbarossa, Frederick II, continued to try and take over Rome, but his attention in Italy left the Holy Roman Empire fragmented in Germany. As this occurred, more power grew amongst the nobles, and at the same time, Frederick faced challenges from the Pope himself. Pope Innocent III, who was guilty of being the most political pope, was a thorn in the side of Frederick and other Holy Roman emperors.
Innocent probably abused his papal power in the attempt to rule not just the Holy Roman Empire, but all secular rulers. He had expelled both King John of England and Philip II of France, two people we talked about in our last video. Pope Innocent also even started a crusade in southern France against a group of people who had kind of advanced Christianity past to its old ideas. Trying to purify the church, he resorted to these brutal tactics. Innocent definitely believed that the Pope was superior to all rulers. Look what he said here.
Just as the moon gets her light from the sun is inferior to the sun in quality, quantity, position, and effect, so the royal power gets the splendor of its dignity from the papal authority.
And that right there is the legacy of the Holy Roman Empire during the Middle Ages. We see this constant struggle for power between popes and emperors, and in the end, the Pope comes out on top more often than not. It brings up a serious question about the role of the church versus the role of the state. Who should be above who? Well, that's a worldview discussion, and it's one that I hope you ponder. Because it's starting to seem like the more these two things mix, the more separate they are. And because they're two completely different entities, they can never really coexist. And they're both gifted in ruling their own areas of life. But when they combine, all that comes out is conflict. And so yes, the coronation of Otto I and the subsequent Holy Roman emperors sparks a return of the emperor. The Holy Roman Empire is back. It wasn't just going to end with Charlemagne. Is that what's best for the empire? Is that what's best for the church? History would tell us probably not. And yet the Holy Roman Empire will remain a significant power all the way through the Middle Ages and even into the age of Renaissance and the age of exploration and even all the way up to the beginnings of Germany. And this ensures that the Pope stays at the heart of not only the religious side of things, but also extremely in the thick of everything political. But that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.